They laughed like I was a child pretending to wear a soldier's uniform. They didn't know who was standing 3 tables away, my commanding officer, the man who had once trusted me with 20 lives. And when he heard their voices mocking me, his words cut through the music, "Stand down." That was the moment my parents learned their daughter wasn't just pushing papers in some air-conditioned office. She was Spectre One, the pilot who'd flown through hell to save the very man now sitting frozen with his champagne glass halfway to his lips. My father. My name is Emily Carter, and I've flown helicopters through sandstorms that could strip paint off metal. But sitting at this wedding in Savannah, Georgia, surrounded by the suffocating perfume of gardenias and old money, I'd rather be back in those storms. The Whitmore estate sprawled before us like something torn from Southern Living magazine string lights draped between ancient oaks, tables dressed in ivory linens, champagne flutes catching the late afternoon sun. My cousin Jessica was marrying into one of those military families where everyone's grandfather had a building named after them at Fort Benning, the kind of wedding where retired generals told war stories between the salad and the main course, where dress blues outnumbered tuxedos, where honor and tradition hung in the air thick as the humidity. I smoothed my hands over my simple navy dress, the one my mother had insisted was appropriate. No medals, no insignia, nothing that would give away what I'd done or where I'd been. Just Mark and Linda Carter's disappointing daughter, back home after what everyone believed was 8 years of filing reports at MacDill Air Force Base. "Emily, sweetheart, sit up straight," my mother hissed from beside me, her fingers tight around her champagne glass. "The Richardsons are watching." The Richardsons, another military family, another set of sons who'd gone to West Point. Another reminder of everything I apparently wasn't. I straightened my spine not because she asked, but because old habits die hard. In the cockpit of a Black Hawk, posture could mean the difference between life and death. "She always was a sloucher," my father said to Colonel Richardson at the next table, loud enough for me to hear, loud enough for everyone to hear. Even in uniform. That's probably why they stuck her behind a desk. The laughter rippled outward like shrapnel. I kept my eyes on the centerpiece white roses and baby's breath. Someone's idea of elegance. My fingers found the small scar on my left palm, a souvenir from Afghanistan that I'd told them came from a paper cut gone wrong. "Desk pilot," someone whispered, and more laughter followed. "Paper wings," another voice added. My mother joined in, her voice carrying that special tone she reserved for public humiliation disguised as motherly concern. We tried to convince her to go into intelligence at least, something with prestige. But Emily always did like her air conditioning and regular hours. Air conditioning. I almost laughed. I remembered the cockpit temperature hitting 120 degrees Fahrenheit, sweat streaming down my back as I held the bird steady while rangers fast roped into a hot zone. Regular hours. Tell that to the 36 hours I'd spent awake during Operation Falcon Dust. Eyes burning, hands cramped on the controls. Flying mission after mission because I was the only pilot left who knew those mountains well enough to navigate them in the dark. "Remember when she was little," Dad continued, warming to his audience. "Used to run around with that toy helicopter, making shooting sounds. We thought she'd grow up to be something special." Something special. The words lodged in my throat like glass. Uncle Thomas, 3 bourbon deep and getting louder, chimed in. "Well, at least she served, even if it was just shuffling papers for real warriors. Real warriors. Men like him who'd spent Vietnam stateside, telling stories about combat he'd seen in movies. Men like my father, who wore his bronze star like a shield but never mentioned it came from an operation where he'd been rescued, not the rescuer." I stood up slowly, placing my napkin on the table with deliberate precision. Every eye turned to me, expecting what an outburst, tears. Another family embarrassment for the Carter collection. "Excuse me," I said, voice steady as my hands on the cyclic during a dust-off. "I need some air." My mother's laugh followed me as I walked away. She never could handle family gatherings. Too much excitement after all those years in an office. The laughter crescendoed behind me, a symphony of mockery that echoed across the manicured lawn. They were still laughing when I reached the garden's edge, where the cultivated beauty gave way to wild Spanish moss and shadows. Not one of them knew about the medal ceremony I'd attended alone, the silver star they'd pinned to my chest while my parents thought I was at a conference. Not one of them knew about Spectre 1, the call sign that could make hardened operators breathe easier when they heard it crackling over the radio. Not one of them knew their precious family honor had been salvaged by the very daughter they mocked. But Colonel Reed Donovan knew, and he was sitting 3 tables away, his jaw tight, his eyes tracking my exit with the focus of a man who'd seen too much to tolerate this kind of ignorance. The music swelled, the band launching into another jazz standard. Behind me, the party continued, built on lies as carefully maintained as the estate's hedges. They thought they were mocking a paper pusher, a failure, a disappointment. They had no idea they were laughing at the woman who'd brought their heroes home. The lake behind the Whitmore estate stretched out like black glass, broken only by moonlight that cut across its surface in sharp, silver lines. I walked until the music became distant thunder, until the laughter dissolved into cricket song and the whisper of Spanish moss in the evening breeze. My heels sank into the soft earth near the water's edge. I kicked them off, letting my bare feet touch the cool grass, the first real thing I'd felt all evening. The moon's reflection wavered on the water, and for a moment, it looked exactly like the Helmand River on that night 5 years ago. When everything changed, I closed my eyes, and I was back there. 217 the radio crackling with panic. Spectre 1, we have troops in contact. How copy my hands steady on the controls despite the RPG that had just torn through our tail rotor hydraulics. 20 men trapped on a ridgeline, Taliban fighters closing in from 3 sides, and I was their only way out. The Black Hawk shuddered beneath me, wounded but still flying, still fighting. Copy all, Reaper 6, Spectre 1 inbound, 2 mics out. 2 minutes, in combat. 2 minutes stretches like hours. Every second a decision, every decision carrying the weight of lives. My co-pilot, Martinez, was slumped in his seat, blood seeping through his flight suit from shrapnel that had punched through the cockpit armor. The crew chief was returning fire through the cargo door, brass casings dancing across the deck. But all I could think about was those 20 men waiting for me. One of them, I'd learn later, was my father. The memory shifted, and I was hovering over the extraction point, rotors beating the air into a sandstorm that obscured everything beyond 30 feet. Tracers streamed past the windscreen like deadly fireworks. The Black Hawk groaned, overcrowded, overladen, but I held her steady while they loaded the wounded. That's all of them. Spectre 1 go, go, go. 16 minutes of flying through hell. 16 minutes of threading between mountain peaks in total darkness, using nothing but muscle memory and instinct because our navigation systems had been shot to pieces. 16 minutes of Martinez's labored breathing beside me, of promises whispered to a machine, just hold together, just get us home. We made it. All 20 men survived. Martinez survived. The Black Hawk died on the tarmac at Bagram. Her last act of service complete. Operation Falcon Dust. Classified beyond classified. The kind of mission that never makes the news, never makes the history books, but lives forever in the nightmares of those who were there. I opened my eyes, back at the lake, back in Georgia, where my heroism was a joke told over champagne. The water lapped at the shore with a rhythm like rotor blades. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called a lonely sound that reminded me of the forward operating bases where I'd spent so many nights, waiting for the call that would send us into the dark. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Stop being dramatic and come back. You're embarrassing us. Embarrassing them. I almost threw the phone into the lake. Instead, I thought about the folder locked in my apartment safe: photographs, commendations, mission reports with more redacted black ink than visible text, proof of who I really was, what I'd really done. I'd thought about bringing it tonight, throwing it on the table like a grenade, but that would have been petty. That would have been weak. No, if they ever learned the truth, it wouldn't be from me begging for their approval with documents and medals. It would come from somewhere else, someone else, at a moment when the revelation would burn hottest. The next time they laugh, I said to the lake, to the moon, to the ghosts of all the men I'd carried home, they'll know exactly who they mocked. A fish jumped, breaking the surface before disappearing again. Ripples spread outward in perfect circles, disturbing the moon's reflection until it reformed, unchanged, unbroken, like me. They could mock, they could laugh, they could diminish everything I'd done to protect them and their comfortable lives, but they couldn't change what was true. I picked up my heels, holding them loose in one hand as I walked along the shoreline. Behind me, the wedding continued, a celebration of unions and traditions, of family bonds that were supposed to mean something. Ahead, the darkness offered no judgment, no expectations, just the simple honesty of night. My father had been Staff Sergeant Mark Carter back then, part of a SEAL team that officially never existed. He'd come home with stories of his own heroism, carefully edited to remove the part where a female pilot had flown through hell to save him. The bronze star on his wall for valor under fire never mentioned that the fire had stopped, only when Spectre 1 appeared over the ridge. I wondered if he ever thought about that night, if he ever connected the daughter he mocked with the shadow in the cockpit who'd refused to leave without him. If somewhere, deep in whatever part of him still remembered what real courage looked like, he knew the truth he'd spent 5 years denying. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. A storm was coming. Good. Let it wash this whole polished world clean, reveal the rot beneath the roses. I stood there until my feet went numb in the cool grass, until the music from the wedding faded to nothing, until all that remained was the sound of water against shore and my own steady breathing. Then I turned back toward the lights, toward the laughter, toward the family that would one day understand exactly what kind of soldier they'd tried to diminish. The revenge would come, not tonight, but soon, and when it did, I wouldn't need to say a word. The truth, when it finally spoke, would roar louder than any Blackhawk's rotors. 3 weeks of living under my parents' roof felt like 3 years. The house in suburban Savannah hadn't changed since I'd left for flight school. Same grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Same faded wallpaper my mother insisted was vintage. Same suffocating weight of disappointment that seemed to seep from the walls. I'd taken leave to reconnect with family, or at least that's what I'd told my superiors. The truth was simpler. I needed to see if anything had changed. If maybe, after all these years, they might see me differently. They didn't. "Emily, could you set the table?" My mother's voice drifted from the kitchen, where she was preparing another dinner for another gathering of family friends. "And use the good china. The Morgans are coming, and their son just made Major." Major. She said it like it was the word for God. I placed each plate with mechanical precision, muscle memory from 1,000 pre-flight checks taking over. Fork at 9 o'clock, knife at 3, spoon at 12, everything in its place, everything perfect, everything except their daughter. "You know," my mother continued, appearing in the doorway with her apron still on, her hair perfectly coiffed despite the kitchen heat. "Mrs. Morgan says Bradley is still single. Maybe you two could—" "I'm not interested." "You're 34, Emily. When I was your age, I already had you and your brother." My brother. The investment banker in New York who'd never served a day but somehow earned more respect for his MBA than I did for my wings. "Women in the military." She shook her head, returning to her cooking. "It's just not natural. All that time around men, acting like men. No wonder you're still alone." I set down the last plate harder than necessary. The china rang like a bell. That evening, my father sat in his study, the room that was part shrine, part fortress. His bronze star held center position on the wall, surrounded by unit photos, commendations, and carefully curated memories of his service. I stood in the doorway, watching him clean his service pistol, a ritual he performed every Sunday, even though it hadn't been fired in years. Dad. He looked up, his expression already guarded. What is it? Why don't you ever talk about Operation Falcon Dust? His hands stilled on the weapon. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Fear, recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual stern indifference. That's classified. I know. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. He returned to his pistol, movements sharp, aggressive. You wouldn't understand, he said finally. Real combat operations aren't like your administrative duties. Administrative duties. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood. The helicopter extraction, I pressed. The pilot who, I said it's classified. He slammed the pistol on his desk, the sound echoing through the room. Why are you asking about this? Just curious about your service. He studied me for a long moment, and I wondered if somewhere in that examination he saw the truth. If he recognized his daughter's eyes as the same ones that had looked back at him through the cockpit glass that night, wide with determination despite the chaos. Curiosity doesn't suit you, Emily. Stick to what you know. I left him there, surrounded by his selective memories. Later that night, I found myself in the garage, searching through old boxes labeled Emily High School and family photos. That's when I saw a photograph tucked behind my father's tool cabinet, probably fallen and forgotten. The image showed a group of SEALs posing in front of a Black Hawk. My father stood on the far left, young and cocky, his hand resting on the helicopter's hull. The photo had been taken after Falcon Dust. I recognized the tail number, the battle damage on the fuselage that we'd limped home with. But there was something else. The corner of the photo had been carefully cut away. I held it up to the fluorescent light and could just make out the edge of what had been removed, the shape of a figure in the cockpit window, a pilot's helmet barely visible. Me. He'd cut me out of the picture. I pocketed the photo and returned to the house, where my mother was watching her evening shows, wine glass in hand. Found something interesting in the garage, I said, sitting across from her. She barely looked up. Your father needs to clean that place out. So much junk. Mom, do you know what Dad did in Afghanistan? His real missions. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, all that military stuff blurs together. Secret this, classified that. All I know is he came home a hero, and that's what matters. A hero? Yes, he came home, because someone flew through hell to bring him back. The clock chimed 10 p.m., and I stood to leave. Where are you going? For a walk? At this hour, it's not safe. I almost laughed. Not safe. I'd flown night operations in hostile territory where every shadow could hide an RPG, where safety was a luxury no one could afford. But here, in suburban Savannah, a walk after dark was dangerous. I'll be fine. Mom. Outside, the air hung thick with humidity and the promise of rain. I walked the familiar streets of my childhood, past houses where people slept soundly, never knowing how close they'd come to losing their fathers, sons, brothers, never knowing that the woman they dismissed as a failure had been the thin line between their loved ones and a Taliban execution. My phone buzzed, a text from my commanding officer. Carter, heard you're on leave. Donovan's asking about you. Says he owes you a drink from the old days. Colonel Reed Donovan. He remembered. He knew. I typed back, tell him I'll take him up on that soon. The pieces were falling into place. The next family gathering, the next moment of public mockery, the next time they laughed at their disappointment of a daughter, it would all end. I looked up at the stars, hidden behind clouds, but still there, still burning, just like the truth. You wanted silence, I whispered to the empty street. But silence has a way of breaking when you least expect it. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by my mother with the kind of excitement usually reserved for lottery wins. Cream-colored cardstock, gold-embossed letters, the weight of money in every fiber of the paper. The Morrison wedding, she practically sang, waving the invitation like a flag. James Morrison's boy is getting married, your father's old unit buddy. You remember, I remembered, James Morrison, another SEAL from my father's team, another man who'd been on that ridgeline 5 years ago, another life I'd saved who didn't know my name. The whole family's invited, my mother continued, already mentally planning her outfit. It's at the Telfair estate next month. Everyone will be there, the Richardsons, the Donovans, the Whitfields, all the military families. The Donovans. My pulse quickened. Colonel Reed Donovan. I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Oh yes, he's close with the Morrisons. James's son served under him in Iraq. She looked at me with that familiar expression of disappointment. You really should make more of an effort to know these people. Emily, connections matter. If only she knew the connections I already had. My father walked in, coffee mug in hand, and glanced at the invitation. Good. About time we had something to celebrate in this family. We need to make a good impression, my mother said, already in planning mode. Emily, you'll need a proper dress. Something that doesn't make you look so... She paused, searching for the word. Militant. I can dress myself. Mom. Can you? Because that black thing you wore to Jessica's wedding made you look like you were attending a funeral. My father snorted. At least she attended. Remember when she missed your cousin Robert's promotion ceremony, too busy with her important paperwork? I'd missed it because I was flying medical evacuation in Kandahar, ferrying wounded Marines to the field hospital. Paperwork. I'll be there, I said simply. Over the next 3 weeks, the wedding became my mother's obsession. Phone calls with other military wives to coordinate outfits, ensure no one wore the same color, gossip about who was invited and who wasn't. My father joined in with his own preparations, polishing his dress blues, arranging his medals with the precision of a man who believed his worth could be measured in ribbons. You should wear your uniform, he told me one evening, not looking up from his medals. Why, you always said I didn't earn the right to wear it with pride? He glanced at me, something unreadable in his eyes. It would look better than you showing up in civilian clothes. People will ask questions. Let them ask. The tension crackled between us, but he turned away, returning to his medals. Always polishing, never tarnished. Unlike his opinion of me, 2 nights before the wedding, my mother cornered me in the kitchen. Emily, I need you to promise me something. I waited, knowing what was coming. Please don't embarrass us. I know these events are hard for you, being around all these successful military families. But successful, you know what I mean. Real combat veterans, decorated officers. Just try to blend in. Don't mention your service unless someone asks directly. And even then, keep it brief. Keep it brief, I repeated. Yes. No one wants to hear about logistics and filing systems at a wedding. Logistics and filing systems. If she only knew the logistics of flying a damaged helicopter through a mountain pass at night with no instruments. If she only knew the filing system for letters to families of those who didn't make it home. And Emily. She touched my arm, her voice softening in that way that somehow made it worse. Maybe try to smile more. You always look so serious. Men don't like that. I pulled my arm away. I'll try to remember that. The day before the wedding, I stood in my childhood bedroom, looking at the dress I'd chosen. Not black this time, deep navy blue. Almost the color of the night sky over Helmand. Simple. Elegant. With a subtle structure that reminded me of my dress uniform without being obvious. On my dresser sat a small jewelry box. Inside, a delicate silver necklace with a tiny pendant, the Falcon Squadron insignia, shrunk down to the size of a fingernail. So small that no one would recognize it unless they knew exactly what to look for. Colonel Donovan would know. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. We have much to discuss. R. D. Reed Donovan. My heart rate picked up, not from fear, but from anticipation. The man who'd been my commanding officer, who'd trusted me with impossible missions, who'd pinned the silver star to my chest in a ceremony my parents never knew existed. I typed back, "Copy that, sir." His response came immediately. "It's Reed now, Emily. You've earned the right to use my first name." Earned the right. Everything in the military was about earning rank, respect, the right to speak, the right to be heard. I'd earned it all, but to my family, I remained unworthy. That night, my parents hosted a small dinner for family who'd come in early for the wedding. The usual suspects, aunts and uncles, cousins, all gathering to share stories and memories, none of which included me. "Remember when Mark came home from deployment?" Uncle Thomas was saying, 3 drinks in and getting louder. "Looked like hell, but standing tall. A real warrior." "Those were different times," my father said, accepting the praise with practiced humility. "We did what we had to do." "Not like today," Thomas continued. "Now they let anyone wear the uniform. Water it down with diversity quotas and desk jockeys." He looked directly at me when he said it. "Pass the salt," I said calmly, meeting his gaze. He slid it over, smirking. "At least you're good at passing things." The table laughed. My mother tittered nervously. My father said nothing, which was worse than joining in. I stood, placing my napkin carefully beside my plate. "Excuse me, I need some air." "There she goes again." I heard my mother sigh as I left. Always so dramatic. Outside, I looked up at the stars, clear tonight, like they'd been that night over the mountains. Tomorrow, at the Morrison wedding, under those same stars, everything would change. Tomorrow, I whispered to the darkness. Tomorrow, the silence ends. The Telfair estate glowed under strings of warm lights, each bulb casting golden circles on the lawn below. Jazz drifted through the evening air, a live band playing classics, while guests mingled with champagne flutes that caught the light like liquid stars. Everything was perfect, orchestrated down to the last gardenia in the centerpieces. I wore my navy dress like armor, the hidden Falcon Squadron pendant cool against my skin. My parents flanked me as we entered, my mother's hand possessive on my father's arm, her smile bright and social. She'd chosen pearl gray for herself, what she called understated elegance. My father's dress blues bore his medals in precise rows, each one polished to mirror brightness. "The Carters!" James Morrison's voice boomed across the cocktail hour. He approached with arms wide, still built like the SEAL he'd been, though silver now threaded through his hair. "Mark, you old bastard, good to see you." They embraced with the kind of backslapping that passed for affection among men who'd seen combat together. James turned to my mother, kissing her cheek. Then his eyes landed on me. "And this must be Emily. Heard you're in the Air Force." "Army," I corrected quietly. "Aviation." "Ah, helicopters." He said it like a question he already knew the answer to. "Support roles, right, important work, keeping the birds maintained." Something like that. My father clapped James on the shoulder, steering him away. "Come on, I see Richardson over there. He's got a story about that time in Ramadi you need to hear." They walked off, leaving me with my mother, who was already scanning the crowd for other wives to join. She spotted her circle near the bar and practically floated over, leaving me alone. Good. I took a champagne flute from a passing waiter and moved through the crowd, cataloging faces. Military families, defense contractors, old money from Savannah who liked to associate with warriors without getting their hands dirty. And there, 3 tables from where my family would sit, I saw him. Colonel Reed Donovan stood with a group of officers, his presence commanding even in a simple black tuxedo. His hair had gone completely gray since I'd last seen him, but his bearing remained razor straight, his eyes still sharp enough to cut glass. He was listening to someone's story, nodding occasionally, but then his gaze swept the crowd and found me. The slightest nod, an acknowledgement, a promise. Dinner was announced, and we moved to our assigned tables. The seating chart had been carefully arranged military families grouped by rank and generation, a hierarchy as rigid as any chain of command. My family sat with the Morrisons' extended family and a few other couples from my father's old unit. The conversations started before the salads arrived. "Did you hear about the Thompson boy?" Mrs. Morrison was saying. "Just got his wings at Pensacola, flying F-18s now." "Now that's a real pilot," my father said, raising his glass slightly. "Not like these transport and support pilots. No offense. Emily?" "None taken," I replied, cutting into my salad with precise movements. "It's just different," he continued, warming to his theme. "Fighter pilots, attack helicopter pilots, they're warriors. The rest are just bus drivers." "Mark," my mother chided gently, but she was smiling. "Emily does important work. Someone has to handle the paperwork." "Paperwork," Uncle Thomas echoed from across the table. "My tax dollars at work." The laughter started then, rippling around the table. Mrs. Morrison tried to be kind, patting my hand. "Don't listen to them, dear. I'm sure your filing system is very efficient." More laughter. My father was in his element now, playing to his audience. "You should see her at home," he said, gesturing with his wine glass. "Sits at her computer typing reports about supply requisitions while real soldiers are out there bleeding for freedom." "Mark." My mother's voice carried a warning, but not for my sake. She was worried he was drinking too much, saying too much. "What? It's true. 8 years in the Army, and what does she have to show for it? No combat action ribbon, no bronze stars, nothing but a desk chair and carpal tunnel." The table roared. I sipped my champagne, feeling the weight of eyes on me, but not their eyes, Colonel Donovan's. He'd turned in his chair, listening. "Remember that night in Afghanistan?" James Morrison said suddenly, his voice dropping to that reverent tone reserved for war stories. "Operation Falcon Dust. When that crazy pilot flew through hell to get us out." My father's face changed, tightening. "That pilot had balls of steel," James continued. "Never found out who it was. Whole thing was classified, but whoever flew that bird saved our asses." "Probably some Apache jockey from the 160th, someone suggested. "Had to be Special Operations Aviation." Another agreed. "No regular pilot could have made that flight." My father nodded along, accepting their theories, building on them. "Whoever it was knew what they were doing. Real warrior." "Unlike some," Thomas muttered, looking at me. "Yes," my mother added, her voice carrying that special tone of maternal disappointment. "It's a shame Emily never amounted to anything like that. We had such hopes." "At least she looks pretty in a dress," someone said, and the laughter crescendoed. That's when I heard it, the scrape of a chair being pushed back, slow, deliberate. Colonel Reed Donovan was standing. He straightened his jacket with careful precision, then began walking toward our table. The conversations around us began to fade as people noticed his movement. A full-bird colonel didn't cross a room without purpose. My mother noticed him approaching and brightened. "Oh, look, it's Colonel Donovan. Mark, isn't he friends with—" Donovan reached our table and stood directly behind my chair. His hand came to rest on my shoulder, gentle but unmistakable. "Captain Carter," he said, his voice carrying across not just our table but the adjacent ones. "I didn't expect to see you here." The table went silent. My father's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. "Colonel," I replied, not turning around. "Stand up, Captain. Let me look at you." I rose slowly, turning to face him. He examined me with those sharp eyes. Then something in his expression softened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice now loud enough for half the reception to hear. "I don't believe you know who you're dining with." Colonel Donovan's hand remained on my shoulder, steady as a mountain. The jazz band played on, but our corner of the reception had gone cemetery quiet. Every eye fixed on us, my mother's mouth slightly open. My father frozen with his champagne glass suspended in midair. Is this the daughter who flew the Black Hawk through enemy fire? Donovan's voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. The one who saved 20 men when I ordered her to hold the line. The champagne glass in my father's hand trembled. A drop of golden liquid splashed onto the white tablecloth, spreading like a wound. I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison stammered. There must be some mistake. Emily works in administration. Administration. Donovan's laugh was sharp, bitter. Is that what she told you? He looked down at me, and in his eyes I saw the same fierce pride he'd shown the day he pinned the silver star to my chest in that classified ceremony. Captain Emily Carter, he said, each word deliberate, is one of the finest combat pilots I've ever commanded. Falcon Squadron, Spectre 1. Uncle Thomas's fork clattered onto his plate. That's impossible. She's just what? Donovan's voice turned cold. Just a woman, just a disappointment, just someone you've been mocking all evening while stuffing your face with shrimp. The blood drained from Thomas's face. Donovan turned to my father, and something dangerous flickered in his expression. Mark, you remember that night, don't you, 5 years ago? The ridgeline, Taliban closing in from 3 sides. My father's jaw worked soundlessly. You were Staff Sergeant Carter then, pinned down with your unit, calling for extraction. Do you remember what call sign answered? The entire table held its breath. Spectre 1, my father whispered. Louder. Sergeant, I don't think everyone heard you. Spectre 1, his voice cracked. And do you know who Spectre 1 was? Who flew that Black Hawk through RPG fire with a wounded co-pilot and half her hydraulics shot out, who refused to leave until every last man was on board. My father's eyes moved to me, and in them I saw the exact moment the truth detonated in his mind. His face went white, then red, then a sick gray. Your daughter, Donovan said. The one you just called a paper pusher. The one you said had carpal tunnel from typing reports. She saved your life, and you've spent 5 years mocking her for it. But she told us. My mother's voice came out strangled. She told you what her classification required her to tell you, Donovan replied. Everything she's done, every mission she's flown, has been classified beyond your clearance level. She couldn't tell you even if she wanted to. James Morrison stood slowly, his face cycling through expressions disbelief, recognition, shame. You're Spectre 1. You're the pilot who flew you home, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since Donovan arrived. All of you. The Bronze Star, someone whispered. Mark's Bronze Star was from that night. Donovan smiled, but it held no warmth. Yes, Mark got a Bronze Star for valor under fire. Emily got a Silver Star for making sure he lived to receive it. But I suppose you didn't know that either, since she wasn't allowed to tell you about the ceremony. My mother's hand covered her mouth, tears starting to form. Emily, we couldn't have known. You could have trusted me, I said, my voice steady despite the years of pain threatening to break through. You could have believed I was more than what you saw. Show them, Donovan said suddenly. The scar on your left shoulder. Show them. I hesitated, then turned slightly, pulling the edge of my dress to reveal the puckered scar tissue, a souvenir from shrapnel that had punched through the cockpit door. That's not from a filing cabinet, Donovan said. That's from the same RPG that wounded her co-pilot. She flew 16 minutes like that, bleeding, keeping that bird in the air through sheer will. The table around us had gone completely silent. The Morrison wedding continued in the distance, laughter, music, celebration, but our corner had become a tribunal. I don't tolerate anyone mocking my officers, Donovan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Especially not the ones who've bled for their country, who've saved lives, who've earned the right to be called warriors. He looked around the table, meeting each set of eyes. Stand down, he commanded, though no one had been standing. All of you, stand down. It wasn't a military order, none of them were active duty, none of them under his command, but the weight of it, the authority in his voice, made them shrink back like scolded children. My father tried to speak. "Emily, Don't." I cut him off. "Not here." "Not now." Donovan squeezed my shoulder once, then released it. "Captain Carter, would you join me for a drink? I believe we have 5 years of catching up to do." "Yes, sir." "It's Reed," he corrected gently. "You've more than earned the right to use my first name." As we walked away, I heard the chaos erupting behind us, voices raised in confusion, denial, frantic questions. My mother calling my name. My father's silence louder than any shout. But I didn't turn around. I'd spent 5 years turning the other cheek, accepting their mockery, swallowing their disappointment. Now they could swallow the truth. Donovan led me to the bar, away from the wreckage we'd left behind. "You handled that with more dignity than I would have," he said, signaling the bartender. "I wanted to deck your father the moment he opened his mouth." "It wasn't worth it," I said. "They weren't worth it." "No," he agreed, accepting 2 glasses of whiskey. "But you are. You always were." We clinked glasses, and I took a burning sip. "How long have you known?" I asked. "That he was my father?" "Since the day I reviewed the after-action reports, saw the passenger manifest, saw your last name, did the math." He studied me. "You never said anything." What was there to say that I saved my own father and he still thought I was worthless? "You're not worthless, Emily. You're worth 20 of him." Behind us, the wedding continued. But at one table, the celebration had ended. The mockery had stopped. The laughter had died. They wanted silence. They got truth. And truth had struck like a hellfire missile, sudden, devastating, and absolutely final. The parking lot stretched out under harsh sodium lights, turning everything a sickly orange. I'd left the reception shortly after my drink with Donovan, unable to stomach the stares and whispers that followed me everywhere. My heels clicked against the asphalt as I walked toward my rental car, keys already in hand. "Emily!" My father's voice stopped me. He stood by his truck, a shadow against the light, still in his dress blues but somehow looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His medals caught the light bronze star, Purple Heart, combat ribbons, all legitimate, all earned, but now tarnished by the truth of how he'd lived to wear them. "We need to talk." "No," I said, continuing toward my car. "We don't. Please." The word came out strangled, foreign from his mouth. Mark Carter didn't say please. He gave orders, made demands, stated facts, but he didn't beg. I stopped but didn't turn around. "I need to understand," he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" Now I turned, and maybe it was the lighting, but he flinched at whatever he saw in my face. "Tell you what, that your disappointment of a daughter was the one who saved your life. Would you have believed me?" "I would have. You would have called me a liar, just like you called me weak, soft, a paper pusher, a disgrace to the uniform." Each word landed like a physical blow. "You cut me out of the photo. Dad, the one from after Falcon Dust. I found it in the garage. You literally cut me out." His hand went to his chest, pressing against his medals as if they could protect him from this. "I didn't know it was you in the cockpit." "But you knew it was someone. You knew a pilot risked everything to save you, and you still spent 5 years mocking mine." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I took a step closer, and he actually stepped back. "You wanted a son who was a warrior. You got a daughter who was one, and you couldn't see past your own prejudice to recognize it." "That's not..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "When Donovan said Spectre 1, I thought I was going to be sick. All these years, I've been telling the story of that night, about the pilot who saved us. I called them a guardian angel, a hero, the best damn pilot in the entire theater. Just not your daughter. I wanted them to respect you for what you are, not for what you did." The words hung between us, an echo of something meant to sound noble but landing like another insult. What I am? I laughed, bitter and sharp. What am I? Dad, really tell me what you think I am without what I did. He couldn't answer. We both knew why. You wanted them to respect me for being what a quiet, obedient daughter who never measured up. Or did you mean you wanted them to respect you for having the good sense not to brag about your disappointing offspring? That's not what You wanted them to respect you. I cut him off. It was never about me. It was about your image, your reputation, your story. You couldn't stand the idea that your daughter did something you couldn't, that I flew birds you couldn't, completed missions you weren't capable of, earned medals that outranked yours. His face flushed red. That's not true. Isn't it then? Why hide it? Why let everyone think I was nothing? He reached into his pocket, pulled out something metallic, the old Falcon Squadron insignia, worn and scratched. He held it out to me with shaking hands. This is from that night. I kept it all these years. The crew chief gave it to me, said it fell from the pilot's shoulder when you were pulling us out. I carried it as a reminder of what real courage looked like. I stared at the insignia but didn't take it. It's yours, he said. It always was. Keep it. My voice came out steady, cold. You'll need it to remember the day your silence ended. Emily, please, I'm proud of you. The words I'd waited my whole life to hear, and now they meant nothing. They weren't born from recognition of my achievements, my character, my worth. They came from public humiliation, from being caught in his lies of omission, from having his narrative shattered in front of everyone he wanted to impress. No, I said quietly. You're ashamed. There's a difference. I want to make this right. You can't. You had 5 years to make it right. Hell, you had my whole life to see me for who I really was. But you were too busy looking for the son you never had to see the daughter you did. A couple walked past us, laughing about something from the wedding. They glanced our way, probably recognizing us from the scene inside, and quickly moved on. What do you want me to say? His voice cracked, soldier's composure finally breaking. That I was wrong, that I'm sorry, that I failed you as a father. I don't want you to say anything. I unlocked my car. I spent too many years wanting things from you: approval, recognition, love that wasn't conditional on achievements you deemed worthy. I'm done wanting. You're still my daughter. No, I'm Captain Emily Carter, Spectre 1, Silver Star recipient, and the pilot who saved your life. Your daughter was someone else, someone who didn't exist outside your inability to see her. I opened the car door, but his hand shot out, not grabbing, just hovering near my arm. Will you ever forgive me? I looked at him one last time. This man who'd raised me, who'd taught me to be strong while criticizing my strength, who'd shown me what honor meant while denying me mine. In the harsh parking lot light, he looked old, diminished, like armor with nothing left inside. I forgave you years ago, I said. I had to survive the weight of your disappointment. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Some things break beyond repair. Emily, goodbye, Dad. I got in the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, still holding that insignia, shoulders bent like Atlas finally understanding the weight of the world he'd been carrying wrong. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction in the revenge, no joy in the revelation, just a hollow peace, like the silence after a helicopter's rotors finally stop. They'd wanted silence about my service, my achievements, my worth. Now they had a different kind, the silence of absence, of bridges burned, of a daughter who'd finally stopped trying to cross the distance they'd created. The truth had done its work, and sometimes that's all the revenge you need. The parking lot had emptied considerably by the time I reached the far edge where I'd parked. The wedding reception continued behind me, muffled music and laughter carrying across the distance like radio chatter from another lifetime. I stood by my car, not quite ready to leave, not quite able to stay. Figured you'd still be here. Colonel Reed Donovan emerged from the shadows between two cars, his bow tie undone, jacket over his arm. He looked more like the field commander I remembered than the polished wedding guest from earlier. "Taking a moment," I said. "Mind if I join you?" I nodded, and we stood together in comfortable silence, looking back at the glowing reception tent. From here, it looked like a beacon in the dark, all warm light and celebration, hiding the wreckage we'd left at one particular table. "You know," Donovan said, pulling out a cigarette he didn't light, just turned it over in his fingers. "I've given a lot of orders in my career, called in airstrikes, ordered advances, sent men into situations I knew they might not return from. But stand down back there, that might be the most satisfying command I ever gave." A laugh escaped me, short but genuine. Their faces were something. "Your father looked like he'd seen a ghost." "He did. His own." Donovan nodded slowly. "You handled it with more discipline than most men I know." "Discipline's easy when the truth does the talking." He turned to face me fully, and in the parking lot lights, I could see the respect in his eyes, the same look he'd given me after every successful mission, every impossible landing, every life saved. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Go back to base. Fly. Save lives. The same thing I've always done." "And your family? They know where to find me. They always did. They just chose not to look." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a challenge coin, not just any coin, but his personal one, the one he'd carried through 3 tours. "I want you to have this. Sir Reed, I can't. You can, and you will." He pressed it into my hand. "Every time you doubt yourself, every time you wonder if what you did mattered, you look at that and remember you're the best damn pilot I ever commanded. Your parents' blindness doesn't diminish that. Nothing does." The coin was warm from his pocket, heavy with meaning. "Thank you." He snapped to attention and gave me a proper salute not required, not regulation here in civilian clothes in a parking lot, but proper nonetheless. I returned it, crisp and clean, the way he'd taught me. "Fly safe. Spectre 1. Always do, sir." He walked away, back toward the wedding, leaving me alone with the night and the truth of what had just happened. I got in my car but didn't start it immediately. Instead, I sat there, holding Donovan's coin, thinking about the weight of silence and the price of truth. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Emily, please come back. We need to talk. Your father is—" I deleted it without reading the rest. Another buzz. This one from a number I didn't recognize. "Captain Carter, this is James Morrison. I owe you more than I can ever repay. Thank you for my life. Thank you for giving me the chance to see my son get married tonight. Sergeant Morrison retired." That one I kept. As I finally started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of the reception in my rearview mirror. Somewhere in that golden bubble of light, my parents were dealing with the collapse of the narrative they'd built. The successful father, the devoted mother, the disappointing daughter, all lies, all shattered in a single moment of truth. I'd wanted revenge for so long, planned for it, prepared for it, but now that it had come, delivered by Donovan's perfectly timed revelation, I felt only empty, not satisfied, not vindicated, just done. The highway stretched out before me, dark and endless. I turned on the radio classic rock, something about flying and freedom, fitting, 10 miles from the estate. I pulled over at a rest stop, got out, walked to the edge where I could see the city lights spreading out below like a landing zone. The coin in my pocket caught the light as I pulled it out, examining it properly for the first time. On one side, Donovan's name and rank. On the other, a simple inscription, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it." I'd lived those words every day for 8 years, in cockpits over hostile territory, in field hospitals under mortar fire, in the suffocating silence of family dinners where my worth was measured and found wanting. But I'd never felt them as deeply as I did standing there, finally free from the need for my parents' approval. My phone rang, my father's ringtone. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mother. Voicemail. Then a number I did recognize, Martinez, my co-pilot from that night, calling from California where he lived now with his family. Alive because I'd kept flying despite his blood on the controls. That one I answered. Just heard from Donovan what went down tonight. You okay? Yeah, Rico, I'm good. About fucking time they knew. Yeah. You need anything, wanna talk? No, just... Thanks for checking. Always got your 6. Spectre, always. After we hung up, I stood there a while longer, feeling the weight of everything shifting, settling into a new configuration. The family I'd lost tonight, had I ever really had them, the respect I'd wanted, did it matter if it came from people who couldn't see past their own prejudice? A Blackhawk passed overhead, probably from the nearby base, rotors beating that familiar rhythm that felt more like home than any house ever had. I watched its lights disappear into the darkness and made my decision. I got back in the car and drove not toward the base. Not yet. First, I drove to the small aviation museum outside the city, the one that stayed open late on Saturdays, parked outside and walked to the memorial wall, where they kept photos of all the local aviation heroes. My photo wasn't there. Classified operations didn't get public memorials, but I knew who I was, what I'd done, who I'd saved. That was enough. As I traced my fingers over the empty space where my photo should have been, I whispered the words I'd held inside for so long. They wanted silence. I gave them truth, and truth doesn't whisper. The moon was high when I finally headed back to base, back to my real life, back to the family I'd chosen my unit, my brothers and sisters in arms who knew my worth without needing to see my medals. Behind me, in a wedding reception that had turned into a reckoning, my biological family was learning what happened when you confused silence for shame, when you mistook strength for weakness, when you mocked the very person who'd given you the gift of tomorrow. They'd wanted a hero in the family. They'd had one all along. They just hadn't bothered to look. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Emily's situation? Let me know in the comments.